and they were there about for a few hours, and then they started to march it down Court Street, down to here to the public safety building. It was peaceful. It was really peaceful. They joined the other group that started at the Martin Luther King Park that came here to the public safety building. So there were about two groups, and then they joined together here at the public safety building. That was around 3 o'clock this afternoon. And that's when, I don't know, when we were trying to send video back to the station, try to send back interviews back to the station of what we gathered, that's when we started to hear a lot of commotion. There's a lot of sound that was happening. So like around 4 o'clock is when we started to come here. When things started to get heated, we started to see tear gas being thrown at the protesters. We started to see that they were being targeted. Well, not necessarily targeted, but police was using pellet guns, rubber bullets to try to disperse the crowd. And things really got escalated from that point on. As you can see, there are, that's actually a trailer from a developer that got set on fire, in addition to the other 3 cars that were a part of the police department's, I believe it was like investigative or other types, unmarked cars from the police department that got set on fire. We just saw that there were state police finally came like about 2 to 3 hours after things really got heated, started to come from the other side, from the Cornhill neighborhood, started to come this way, started to disperse the crowds, and now they have moved towards the end part of where we're standing, the farther part of where we're standing, and trying to disperse the protesters. There's a couple of people here that are lingering, but all of this quickly escalated. I don't know how things went from a peaceful protest to things getting it to just like what we're seeing behind us right now. Adam? Good afternoon to you, Mark. Right off the bat, these groups want to see the police officers involved in Daniel Prue's death to be immediately fired. They addressed it right here at the steps of City Hall, and it was very passionate. One group, called Community Justice Initiative, are also calling for the resignation of Rochester Mayor Lovely Warren and Police Chief LaRon Singletary because how the arrest was handled, and says that they weren't transparent. They claim these types of actions further tarnishes the trust between the community and city and police officials. Community activist Reverend Lewis Stewart is also calling for an independent investigation into Prue's death and to remove officers from the force who may have racist views. Here's what some of the speakers had to say.
Arrested, charged with homicide, and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and yet they are still working.
That's right. Yesterday they were patrolling the streets.
And I'm told yesterday they were patrolling the streets.
What?
Now this has got to stop.
We trust in the government. The government has failed us time and time again. And whether you're white, black, or brown, it doesn't make a difference. If you hold the trust of the people, you need to be held accountable for your actions.
Now, Reverend Stewart has not made a decision if he supports the cause to have the mayor and the police chief step down from their positions, but he was very clear that he wants to see those police officers arrested and fired.
And as Newsite's Josh Navarro reports, they're calling for major reform.
It happened right here in Frederick Douglass City.
Tonight, 2 civil rights groups say it's a blow to the community the way Daniel Prue's arrest was handled.
A disservice to his family, a disservice to black people, and a disservice to this community.
Members of the Community Justice Initiative and the United Christian Leadership Ministry gathering at the steps of City Hall in Rochester, demanding change and the firing of the police officers involved in the case. Reverend Lewis Stewart is calling for an independent investigation into Prue's death.
Arrested, charged with homicide, and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and yet they are still working.
That's right. Yesterday they were patrolling the streets.
And I'm told yesterday they were patrolling the streets.
What?
Now this has got to stop.
Community Justice Initiative want Mayor Lovely Warren and Police Chief Laurent Singletary to resign from their positions, saying they weren't transparent and their actions further tarnishes the trust of its residents they represent and serve.
We trust in the government. The government has failed us time and time again. And whether you're white, black, or brown, it doesn't make a difference. If you hold the trust of the people, you need to be held accountable for your actions.
Reverend Stewart is urging law enforcement agencies to remove officers from the force who may have racist views. In Rochester, I'm Josh Navarro, News 8.
All right, Josh, thank you.
Now, protests over the death of Daniel Prude continued overnight and into the early morning. Dozens of protesters rallying outside the public safety building on Exchange Boulevard in Rochester. Police were there as well, using pepper balls to try to disperse the crowd.
Now, those who were there are calling for justice in the death of Daniel Prude, who died in police custody last March. Josh Navarro is live for us in Rochester this morning. So, Josh, good morning. What does the scene look like right now?
Good morning to you, Dan and Julia. Well, the scene right now is a lot quieter compared to a couple of hours ago and the overnight hours where there was a lot of protesters here. We did learn about 30 minutes ago that 2 police officers were injured, hospitalized, and released from these protests. Now, let's get to that video of this protest that happened. A lot of them are very dissatisfied with the mayor's decision of suspending the police officers in question in Daniel Prude's death. They say it's not enough. Protesters were shouting at police officers and kneeling on the ground and creating human chains. Before protesters arrived here at the public safety building, they were over off Jefferson Avenue in Rochester, where activist Reverend Lewis Stewart called for a remembrance and a discussion about Prude's death. Earlier in the day, he also called for the police officers to be fired, arrested, and prosecuted. He also called for an independent investigation into Prude's death. Now, the police chief here, Laurent Singletary, and the mayor, Lovely Warren, were present during the discussion as many protesters showed up, shouting at Reverend Stewart, demanding to speak with the police chief. A frustration building up right here in the community within the last couple of days since Prude's death came into light. We also learned within the last 30 minutes that 8 people were arrested during these protests. Their charges range from disorderly conduct to resisting arrest, and it's highly likely more protests will happen going into the weekend. For now, that is the very latest from here in Rochester. I'm Josh Navarro. I'll send it back to you guys in the studio.
All right, Josh, thank you so much for that live update from Rochester. The state attorney general's...
A 5th night of protests ending peacefully last night in Rochester. More than 1,000 people were on the streets demanding justice for Daniel Prude. Rochester police say no one was arrested Sunday night. The department even thanking community elders for their help in keeping the peace. Josh Navarro has been covering the protests all weekend and all night as well. Josh, I know you're tired. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Mark. Just like you said right there, the protest ended peacefully, like around 1:10 in the morning, without any type of confrontations with police. A major contrast from other demonstrations that have taken place in Rochester. Now, Reverend Amira Brown from Spiritus Christi Church made a call to the community elders to be the buffer between protesters and the police department. Roughly 50 of them answered to that call. They stood behind the barricades at the public safety building as they awaited the protesters to arrive from Jefferson Avenue. They prayed and sang songs, and some elders prayed nonstop throughout the event as local Black Lives Matter leaders spoke for hours, wanting justice for Daniel Prude and transparency from elected officials.
As we come together, we're going to pray, we're going to seek God, and we're going to find a resolve for at least our community, not just what we're standing against, but what's the resolve for us? What's going to bring peace?
Well, we're hoping that as clergy, we can stand as a spiritual barrier between protesters and police. We're hoping that we'd be able to demonstrate in a way that gets the point across that things have to change, and we're hoping for transformation of our city.
and those acts were successful. They did this so voices from demonstrators could be heard as they continue to demand police reform and allocating funds to social services moving forward. For now, we're live in Rochester this morning. I'm Josh Navarro, News 8.
All right, Josh, thank you so much. Some local lawmakers, though, not happy with the mayor's decision to place community elders on the front lines of this protest. County legislator Rachel Barnhart says more should be done to protect protesters.
I saw some small plastic bottles. I saw a sparkler being thrown in the direction of police, and almost instantaneously, hard to say which happened first, but instantaneously, police opened fire on about 1,000 protesters who were gathered. First, she's acknowledging that protesters need protection from police. Second, I don't know if anyone understands the danger that this is putting people in, to use them as a human shield.
There's more work to be done, and I am committed to doing what's necessary, and I know that the chief is committed to doing what's necessary. That was the job that I was elected to do. That was the job that he took an oath to serve.
After a week of protesters occupying City Hall in Rochester, Free the People Rock say they will end the nightly protests that have taken place at that location since last Tuesday.
This is the third week of protesting demanding justice for Daniel Prude, who died after being taken into police custody back in March. And Josh Navarro joins us live from City Hall with a look back at the protests and what prompted an end to these. Good morning, Josh.
Good morning to you, Mark and Leah. It was because subpoenas were issued to local authorities. Nightly protests demanding justice for Daniel Prude started on September 2nd, the day that Daniel Prude's death became public, and it sparked so much emotion and passion. Since September 2nd, demonstrators have taken to the city streets to demand resignations from RPD Chief LaRon Singletary, Mayor Lovely Warren, and District Attorney Sandra Dorley, plus other local officials. The officers involved in Prude's arrest were suspended on September 3rd. At first, the protests alternated between MLK Park and Jefferson Avenue. Jefferson Avenue is where Prude was arrested back in March. Over the last 2 weeks, it became a place for grieving, healing, and coming together as a community. On September 8th, LaRon Singletary announcing his retirement. The site of the protest changed less than a week later when Mayor Lovely Warren officially fired Chief Singletary and named Deputy Chief Mark Simmons interim chief. That next day, protesters took to City Hall and called for his resignation, citing his actions in a case from 2003 as the reason. Protesters set up tents and stayed there every night until last night. Organizers releasing a statement on Free the People Rock Facebook page crediting those who marched, rallied, and occupied City Hall with bringing about real change. On Sunday, Attorney General Letitia James announced a new policy to release body cam footage in police brutality cases directly to the public. And yesterday, subpoenas went out to Mayor Warren and RPD Acting Chief Mark Simmons as part of an investigation into Daniel Prude's death. Here's a live look of what it looks like right now across from City Hall. According to Free the People Rock, organizers will now focus on new actions on the coming weeks. They are urging those who marched and rallied to rest and recharge. They say the movement is just beginning. For now, we're live in Rochester this morning. I'm Josh Navarro, News 8.
All right, Josh, thank you very much for that. Now, for more on the protests and the Daniel Prude investigation, we have a lot of information for you at rochesterfirst.com.